The fluorescent lights in courtroom 7B buzzed with a frequency that matched my racing heartbeat. I sat alone at the defendant's table, my trembling fingers gripping a folder containing the only proof I had left of my father's final wishes. Across the aisle, my sister Victoria reclined in her chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd never lost anything in her life. She looked like money itself, designer suit pressed to perfection, diamond earrings catching the harsh courtroom light, lips curved in that familiar smirk I'd learned to dread during our childhood. Her lawyer, a shark in Armani named Richard Hutchins, was already arranging his documents with theatrical precision, each movement designed to intimidate. I couldn't afford a lawyer like that. I could barely afford the public defender who'd spent exactly 17 minutes preparing my case before admitting she had a packed schedule and couldn't give this the attention it deserved. So here I was, representing myself against my sister's legal machine, fighting for the inheritance my father had explicitly left to me in his will. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Westbrook. The bailiff's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. We stood as Judge Westbrook entered, a stern woman in her 60s whose reputation for no-nonsense rulings preceded her. She settled into her seat with the weight of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying the texture of gravel. Case number 2847B, Victoria Ashford versus Emma Ashford, contested estate of the late Daniel Ashford. Mr. Hutchins, you may proceed. What happened next would make my blood run cold. Richard Hutchins rose with the fluid grace of a predator. Your Honor, this case is quite straightforward. My client, Victoria Ashford, is the eldest daughter of Daniel Ashford, a man who built a commercial real estate empire worth approximately $47 million over his lifetime. The number hung in the air like smoke. I'd never thought of Dad's wealth in such concrete terms. To me, he'd just been Dad. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up helping me with calculus homework, who held my hand when Mom died. Mr. Ashford created a will 18 months before his death, Hutchins continued, in which he left the bulk of his estate to his younger daughter, Emma. However, Your Honor, we will demonstrate that this will was executed under highly suspicious circumstances. I felt my stomach drop. Suspicious circumstances? What was he talking about? Hutchins clicked a remote, and suddenly the courtroom screen illuminated with a photograph I'd never seen before. My father, looking gaunt and confused, in what appeared to be a hospital bed. When had this been taken? As you can see, Daniel Ashford was in severely declining health during the period when this will was allegedly created. Medical records will show he was on a cocktail of medications that substantially impaired his cognitive function. Pain management drugs, anti-anxiety medications, sleep aids. Objection. I shot to my feet, my voice shakier than I wanted. My father was completely lucid when he made his will. He went to a lawyer's office specifically for Ms. Ashford, Judge Westbrook interrupted, her tone sharp. You'll have your opportunity to present evidence. Mr. Hutchins, continue. I sank back into my chair, feeling the walls closing in. Furthermore, Hutchins said, his voice taking on an edge of concern that felt rehearsed, we have testimony that suggests Ms. Emma Ashford may have exercised undue influence over her father during his final months. She moved into his residence, isolated him from other family members, including my client, and controlled his access to outside counsel. The lies were building like a tower of cards, but each one had just enough truth twisted into it to sound plausible. Yes, I'd moved in with Dad during his final months. But that was because he'd asked me to, because he was scared and alone, because Victoria had been too busy with her hedge fund manager husband and their Hampton estate to visit. We're prepared to present evidence, Hutchins continued, that on at least 3 occasions Ms. Emma Ashford prevented my client from seeing their father, claiming he was too tired or not up for visitors. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. I wanted to scream. Those instances had been real. Dad had been too exhausted for visitors. Chemotherapy had ravaged his body, and his doctors had specifically limited visitation to prevent infection. But Hutchins was painting me as some kind of manipulative villain, keeping a daughter from her dying father. Your Honor, my client is not seeking to disinherit her sister entirely, Hutchins said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. She simply wants what is fair. An equal division of the estate, as would be standard and expected in most families. The current will, which gives approximately 90% of the assets to Emma and a mere 10% to Victoria, is clearly the product of diminished capacity and undue influence. He sat down with the satisfied air of someone who'd just delivered a closing argument, not an opening statement. Judge Westbrook turned to me. Ms. Ashford, your response? I stood on legs that felt like water. My prepared notes suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate. Your Honor, everything Mr. Hutchins just said is a distortion of the truth. My father made his will because he wanted to. He was examined by 2 separate physicians who certified his mental capacity. He went to the law firm of Preston and Associates, one of the most reputable firms in the state, and he told them exactly what he wanted. And what was his reasoning for this unequal distribution? The judge asked. This was the moment I'd been dreading. Because the truth was complicated, messy, and made my family look dysfunctional, which we absolutely were. He wanted to leave the majority of his estate to me because Victoria had already received substantial gifts during his lifetime. He'd paid for her Ivy League education, bought her first apartment in Manhattan, invested in her husband's startup company. Meanwhile, I'd worked my way through state college and... Objection. Hutchins was on his feet. This is hearsay and irrelevant to the question of Mr. Ashford's mental capacity at the time the will was executed. Sustained, Judge Westbrook said. Ms. Ashford, do you have concrete evidence regarding your father's mental state? Yes, Your Honor. I have the certificates of capacity signed by Dr. Reeves and Dr. Patel, both of whom examined my father the same week the will was created. I also have a video recording of my father explaining his wishes in his own words. I saw Victoria's composure crack for just a second, a flash of surprise in her eyes. She hadn't known about the video. I'd like to enter this video into evidence, I said, pulling the flash drive from my folder with trembling fingers. But before I could approach the bench, Hutchins was speaking again. Your Honor, we'd like to challenge the authenticity of any such recording. In this age of deepfakes and digital manipulation. The recording was made by the law firm itself. I cut in, my voice stronger now. It's been in their secure possession since the day it was created. There's a complete chain of custody. Judge Westbrook nodded. We'll examine the recording. Bailiff, if you'd set that up. As the bailiff took the flash drive and moved toward the courtroom computer, I felt the first flicker of hope. The video was my trump card. 7 minutes of my father, sitting in the Preston and Associates conference room, calmly and clearly explaining why he'd made the choices he had. The screen flickered to life, and there was Dad. My chest tightened at the sight of him. Thinner than he'd been in his healthy days, but alert, his eyes clear and focused. He wore the blue cardigan I'd given him for his birthday, and I could see the corner of the family photo on the desk behind him. My name is Daniel Robert Ashford. His voice filled the courtroom, and I had to blink back tears. I'm recording this statement of my own free will on October 15, 2023, in the offices of Preston and Associates. I am of sound mind and body, and I want to make my intentions regarding my estate absolutely clear. I watched Victoria's face as Dad spoke. Her jaw was clenched, her knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. I'm leaving the majority of my estate to my daughter Emma, Dad continued on the screen. Not because I love Victoria any less, but because of the choices each of them has made. Victoria has always had a gift for making money. She married well, she invested wisely, and I'm proud of her success. But Emma. His voice softened, and I saw his eyes get a little misty. Emma gave up her own dreams to take care of her mother during the cancer. She put her life on hold for 2 years, and then she did it again for me. Victoria's lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, but she shook him off, her eyes fixed on the screen. This isn't about punishment, Dad said. It's about making sure Emma has the security she deserves after the sacrifices she's made. Victoria doesn't need my money, she has her own fortune. But Emma does, and I want to make sure she's taken care of. This is my final wish, and I'm recording this to make absolutely certain no one can claim I didn't know what I was doing. The video ended. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Westbrook looked at Hutchins. Counselor, do you wish to challenge the authenticity of this recording? But before he could answer, the courtroom doors burst open with a sound like thunder. A man in a black suit strode in, flanked by 2 others who looked like Secret Service agents. He carried a leather briefcase that he set down on the nearest table with a decisive thunk. The authority radiating from him was palpable. Every eye in the courtroom locked onto him. Your Honor, he said, his voice crisp and commanding. I apologize for the interruption, but I have evidence that must be submitted in this case immediately. Evidence that will fundamentally change everything this court believes about Daniel Ashford's estate. Judge Westbrook's face had gone from stern to shocked. And who exactly are you? The man reached into his jacket and produced credentials that made the judge's eyes widen. My name is James Blackwood, he said. I'm the executor of Daniel Ashford's actual estate. And the will being contested here today is not the real one. The courtroom erupted in chaos, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, because standing before us was a man who was about to reveal secrets that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my father's death. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. Now back to the story. Judge Westbrook's gavel cracked against the bench like a gunshot. Order! I will have order in this courtroom. The chaos subsided to a tense silence, but the energy in the room had completely transformed. Everyone was staring at James Blackwood, this mysterious figure who'd just claimed the entire case was built on a lie. I couldn't breathe. Not the real will. What did that even mean? Victoria had gone pale, her perfectly composed mask finally cracking. She leaned toward Hutchins, whispering frantically, but her lawyer looked just as blindsided as everyone else. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Westbrook said, her voice tight with controlled fury, this is highly irregular. You can't simply burst into an active court proceeding and make extraordinary claims without. I understand, Your Honor, and again I apologize. Blackwood's voice was calm but unyielding. However, I've been trying to contact both parties and their legal counsel for the past 6 weeks. My calls and registered letters went unanswered. When I learned this hearing was scheduled, I had no choice but to appear in person. He opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency and withdrew a thick folder. I have here a will executed by Daniel Ashford exactly 3 weeks before his death. It supersedes the will currently being contested. That's impossible. Victoria's voice cut across the courtroom, sharp with panic. Dad was in hospice 3 weeks before he died. He couldn't have. Your father left hospice care for a period of 4 days, Blackwood interrupted smoothly. During that time, he met with me at a private location and executed a new will in the presence of 3 witnesses and a notary public. All proper legal protocols were followed. My mind was reeling. Dad had left hospice? I'd been with him almost every day during those final weeks, and I didn't remember any 4-day period when... Wait. Yes, I did. There had been those few days when Dad had insisted I go to my friend Sarah's wedding in Vermont. He'd practically pushed me out the door, saying he'd be fine, that the hospice nurses would take care of him. I'd felt guilty the entire weekend, calling him every few hours, but he'd sounded energized. More alive than he had in weeks. What exactly does this new will say? Judge Westbrook asked, her skepticism evident. Blackwood didn't hesitate. It establishes a trust structure that neither daughter knew about. Daniel Ashford didn't have $47 million in assets, Your Honor. He had $237 million. The courtroom exploded again. This time, even the judge looked too shocked to restore order immediately. I gripped the edge of the table, my vision swimming. $237 million? That was impossible. Dad had been wealthy, yes, but that kind of money. The discrepancy, Blackwood continued, raising his voice to be heard over the commotion, exists because Daniel Ashford had been quietly buying and selling properties through a network of shell companies for the past 15 years. He did this specifically to hide the extent of his wealth from his family, for reasons he explained in a sealed letter to be read only in the event of a contested will. He produced an envelope from his briefcase, sealed with red wax that bore my father's distinctive signet ring impression, the ring he'd worn every day of his life, the one that had been buried with him. That seal has been verified by a forensic expert, Blackwood said. This envelope has not been opened since Daniel Ashford sealed it himself. Judge Westbrook gestured to the bailiff. Bring it here. As the envelope made its way to the judge, I tried to process what was happening. Dad had hidden hundreds of millions of dollars from us? Why? And what did this mean for the will, for the inheritance, for everything Victoria and I had been fighting about? Victoria looked like she might be sick. All the color had drained from her face, and her hands were shaking. Hutchins was frantically typing on his laptop, probably trying to research who James Blackwood was, and whether any of this could possibly be legitimate. Judge Westbrook examined the seal carefully, then broke it with deliberate slowness. She unfolded the letter inside. I could see it was several pages long, written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. As she read, her expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to something that looked almost like sadness. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Blackwood, is there a reason you're presenting this evidence rather than the Preston and Associates firm that handled the original will? Yes, Your Honor. Daniel Ashford specifically instructed me to keep this will separate from his regular legal counsel. He wanted to ensure there would be no possibility of interference or early disclosure. I run a boutique firm that specializes in complex estate planning for high-net-worth individuals who require discretion. And what exactly does this new will stipulate? Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but I thought I detected a hint of something, sympathy? Concern, in his eyes. The will establishes a trust that cannot be accessed by either daughter until certain conditions are met. Both Emma and Victoria are entitled to equal shares, but only after they complete a series of tasks that Daniel Ashford designed specifically for them. Tasks? Victoria finally found her voice. What kind of tasks? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information yet, Blackwood said. The instructions are quite specific about the timeline and method of revelation. However, what I can tell you is that the $47 million estate currently being contested is essentially a test. Daniel Ashford wanted to see how his daughters would react to a moderately unfair will before revealing the truth about his actual fortune. The words hit me like a physical blow. A test. Our father had been dead for 8 months, and this entire nightmare, the lawsuit, the accusations, the family being torn apart, had been a test? That's insane, Victoria said, and for once I agreed with her. Why would he do that? Blackwood turned to address both of us directly. Your father believed that true character is revealed not in times of plenty, but in times of perceived scarcity. He wanted to know how each of you would behave when you thought resources were limited. The implication hung in the air like poison. Victoria had sued me, had dragged me to court, had accused me of manipulating a dying man. All for money. And I had, what? I'd been ready to defend myself, yes, but I'd also been hurt, betrayed, angry that my sister would think so little of me. This is absurd, Hutchins interjected. Your Honor, we need time to verify all of this. For all we know, this man is a con artist who... The letter is genuine, Judge Westbrook said quietly. I recognize Daniel Ashford's handwriting. He appeared in my courtroom 3 times over the years for various matters. And the seal? She held up the broken wax. This is authentic. It matches the signature in my records. She looked at both Victoria and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The letter explains Mr. Ashford's reasoning in detail. He writes that he spent his life building wealth, but in doing so, he failed to build character in his children. He felt he gave you both too much, expected too little, and created a dynamic where material success became more important than personal growth or family bonds. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. That sounded like Dad, especially the Dad from those final months, when he'd become philosophical, reflective, sometimes brutally honest about his regrets. The current will, the one giving 90% to Emma, was designed to provoke exactly this kind of reaction, Judge Westbrook continued. Mr. Ashford wanted to see if Victoria would accept the unequal distribution gracefully or fight it in court. And he wanted to see if Emma would share willingly with her sister or cling to the inheritance defensively. So we both failed, Victoria said bitterly. That's not for me to judge, the judge replied. But according to this letter and the documentation Mr. Blackwood has provided, you both now face a choice. You can continue to fight over the $47 million, in which case you'll each receive exactly what the current will stipulates, 90% to Emma, 10% to Victoria. Or you can agree to participate in your father's program, complete the tasks he's outlined, and potentially gain access to the full estate. What happens if we refuse the tasks? I heard myself ask. Blackwood answered. Then the entire $237 million goes to charity. The Ashford Foundation, which your father established specifically for this possibility. Neither of you would see a penny of it. Victoria laughed, but it was a harsh, broken sound. So we either dance like puppets for a dead man's amusement, or we get nothing. That's quite the choice, Mr. Blackwood. Your father didn't see it as puppetry, Blackwood said gently. He saw it as an opportunity for both of you to become the women he hoped you'd be. The tasks aren't meant to be punitive, they're meant to be transformative. Can you at least tell us what kind of tasks we're talking about? I asked. Are we talking about weeks, months, years? The program is designed to take approximately 6 months, Blackwood said. The tasks vary in nature, but they all involve working together, making amends for past mistakes, and demonstrating growth in specific areas your father identified as weaknesses. Victoria and I locked eyes across the courtroom for the first time since this hearing began. In her expression, I saw a mirror of my own confusion, anger, and grudging curiosity. Whatever we'd been before, sisters, enemies, strangers, we were now bound together by our father's elaborate posthumous scheme. I need time to think about this, Victoria said. As do I added. Judge Westbrook nodded. I'm going to recess this hearing for 1 week. Mr. Blackwood, you'll make yourself available to both parties to answer questions and provide any additional documentation they require. Ms. Victoria Ashford and Ms. Emma Ashford, I suggest you use this time to carefully consider your options and, perhaps, to speak with each other honestly for the first time in what I suspect has been quite a while. She stood, and we all rose with her. This court is in recess. As everyone began filing out, I remained frozen in place. Victoria was gathering her things, moving like a woman in a dream. Blackwood approached us both, extending business cards with elegant simplicity. I know this is overwhelming, he said quietly. But I want you both to know, I knew your father during his final months. He spoke of you constantly, with tremendous love and also tremendous regret. This isn't a punishment. He genuinely believed this was his last chance to give you something more valuable than money. What could be more valuable than $237 million? Victoria asked, her voice heavy with sarcasm. Blackwood smiled sadly. According to your father? Each other. As he walked away, Victoria and I stood there in the emptying courtroom. Two sisters who'd just discovered that everything they thought they knew about their father, their inheritance, and their family had been an elaborate fiction. Do you want to get coffee? Victoria asked suddenly, her voice small and uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since we were children. Yeah, I said. I really do. But as we walked toward the exit together, I couldn't shake the feeling that agreeing to coffee was just the beginning, and that whatever tasks our father had designed would force us to confront truths far more painful than any courtroom battle could ever be. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. The coffee shop Victoria chose was, predictably, the kind of place where a simple latte cost $12 and came with foam art so elaborate you felt guilty drinking it. We sat at a corner table by the window, two cautiously optimistic strangers who happened to share DNA and a very complicated dead father. For the first few minutes, we just sat in silence, staring at our respective cups. I studied my sister's face, really looked at her for the first time in years. She'd aged since Mom's funeral, the last time we'd had anything approaching a civil conversation. Fine lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes, and there was a tightness to her jaw that spoke of stress I knew nothing about. I can't believe he did this, Victoria finally said, breaking the silence. All of it. The hidden wealth, the test, the courtroom ambush. It's so, Dad, I finished. It's so, Dad. She laughed, a real laugh this time, and nodded. Remember when he made us compete for the best Christmas present when we were kids? Whoever gave him the gift he liked most got to pick the family vacation destination. And you painted him that portrait, I said, smiling despite myself. Spent 3 months on it. It was actually really good. And you gave him a coffee mug you made in art class that said, "World's okayest Dad." And he picked mine, I said. Laughed for 10 minutes straight, and said it was the most honest gift he'd ever received. We went to that cabin in Montana instead of Paris. Victoria's smile faded. I was so angry at you. I'd worked so hard, and you'd just been yourself. That's always been your superpower, hasn't it, Emma? You never had to try. Dad just loved you more. The words hung between us, and I felt my defensive walls starting to rise. But then I looked at her face and saw something I hadn't expected. Vulnerability, real pain, the kind that came from a wound that had never healed. He didn't love me more, I said quietly. He loved us differently. You're right that I didn't have to try as hard, but that wasn't because I was better or more lovable. It was because you. I paused, trying to find the right words. You were always more like him. Ambitious, driven, successful. You didn't need him the way I did. You had Mom. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. And then Mom died and I lost my person and Dad was yours, and I was just alone. God, we'd really never talked about this, had we? We'd just assumed, harbored resentments, built walls, and let the distance between us grow until we were practically strangers. I'm sorry, I said. I should have, when Mom died, I should have reached out more. I should have been a better sister. I sued you for $47 million, Victoria said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I think you win the terrible sister contest. Why did you, though? I asked. You have money. Your husband is loaded. Why go through all of this? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her coffee. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I wanted him to choose me. Even dead, I wanted Dad to have chosen me for once. When I saw that will leaving everything to you, it felt like confirmation of everything I'd always feared. That I was the disappointing daughter, the one who was too hard, too cold, too much like him to be lovable. My chest tightened. Victoria. No, let me finish, she said, her voice stronger now. I know it was wrong. I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it. But I couldn't stop myself. It was like all those years of feeling second best just came pouring out, and I convinced myself that if I could prove the will was invalid, if I could show that Dad wasn't in his right mind, then maybe it would mean his choice wasn't real either. The will wasn't real, I pointed out. It was a test. Which I failed spectacularly, Victoria said with a bitter laugh. I played right into his hands. Proved every fear he had about me being too materialistic, too willing to destroy family for money. I reached across the table and took her hand, surprising both of us. We both failed, Victoria. The test wasn't just for you. Dad knew I'd get defensive and possessive. He knew I'd see your lawsuit as a betrayal instead of a cry for help. He was testing both of us. My phone buzzed. A text from James Blackwood. When you're ready, I can explain the first task. Both sisters must be present. I showed the message to Victoria. What do you think? Are we ready for this? She stared at the phone for a moment, then looked up at me. Honestly? I have no idea. But I also don't think we have much choice. $237 million or nothing. Those aren't exactly great odds for walking away. It's not just about the money, though, I said. If we do this, really do this, it means dealing with all the stuff we've been avoiding for years. Dad knew that. He's forcing us to either fix our relationship or destroy it completely. Maybe it's already destroyed, Victoria said quietly. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe it's just badly damaged and we've been too scared to try to repair it. Victoria pulled out her phone and typed a response to Blackwood. We're ready. Where should we meet? The reply came almost instantly. The Ashford Building, penthouse level, 7 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Victoria looked at me, eyebrows raised. The Ashford Building? Dad sold that property 5 years ago. Apparently not, I said, that familiar feeling of being wrong-footed by our father's secrets rising again. What else do you think he lied about? The Ashford Building stood in the heart of downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that had been Dad's first major commercial success. I'd assumed some corporation owned it now, but as Victoria and I approached the entrance that evening, I saw the small bronze plaque by the door. Property of the Ashford Trust. A security guard who looked like he'd been expecting us nodded and directed us to a private elevator. As we rode up in silence, I caught our reflection in the mirrored walls. Two women who looked related but not close, standing too far apart, both wearing the armor of designer clothes and careful makeup. Whatever happens, Victoria said suddenly, can we agree not to let this break us completely? Like, can we at least try to be civil? I think we can do better than civil, I said. I think we can try to be sisters again. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling penthouse that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the space was furnished with the kind of understated elegance that screamed serious money. But what caught my attention was the wall of photographs, hundreds of them, chronicling our entire lives. There was Mom and Dad on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy. There was Victoria as a baby, me as a toddler. Birthday parties, school plays, family vacations. And there in the center was a photo I'd never seen before. All four of us, taken maybe a year before Mom got sick. We were laughing at something off camera, genuinely happy, a family that still worked. He kept all of this, Victoria whispered, moving closer to the wall. I thought he threw everything away after Mom died. Not threw away. James Blackwood's voice came from behind us. Preserved. This penthouse has been his private space for the past decade. No one else knew about it, not his business partners, not his friends. Just him. We turned to face Blackwood, who looked different outside the courtroom. Less intimidating, more human. He gestured to a seating area where a leather folder rested on a coffee table. Please sit, he said. We have a lot to discuss. As we settled onto the couch, Blackwood opened the folder to reveal a thick document. Your father's program consists of 6 tasks, each designed to address specific issues he identified in your relationship with each other and with yourselves. Task 1 is, in some ways, the most difficult because it requires something both of you have been avoiding for years. Which is? Victoria asked. Complete honesty, Blackwood said. For the next week, you'll be living together in this penthouse. No leaving except for emergencies. No contact with the outside world, except for essential work matters, which must be conducted via video call from the shared office space here. And most importantly, you must engage in daily recorded conversations where you discuss assigned topics from your past. Recorded? I felt my stomach drop. By whom? By me, Blackwood said. I'll be reviewing the footage to verify compliance. You don't have to solve every problem in a week, but you do have to talk about them honestly. The topics are chosen specifically to surface the core conflicts in your relationship. He pulled out a list and handed it to us. I scanned the items, my heart sinking with each one. Day 1. Why you resent each other. Day 2. Mom's death and how it changed you. Day 3. Dad's favoritism, real or perceived. Day 4. The biggest lie you've told each other. Day 5. What you've always wanted to say but never had the courage. Day 6. What you need from each other going forward. Day 7. Whether you can forgive each other. This is insane, Victoria said. Dad wants us to tear each other apart on camera? He wants you to be vulnerable with each other, Blackwood corrected. There's a difference. He believes that you've spent so many years performing your relationship, being the daughters he wanted you to be, or rebelling against what he wanted, that you've never actually been yourselves with each other. And if we refuse? I asked. Then the program ends, and you both receive what the original will stipulated. Emma gets 42 million, Victoria gets 5 million, and the rest goes to charity. You'll never have to see each other again if you don't want to. Or we can do this nightmare week, Victoria said, and potentially get access to 237 million split between us. Plus the knowledge that you tried, Blackwood added, that you gave your father's final wish a real chance. I looked at Victoria, who was staring at the list with an expression I couldn't quite read. What do you think? I think Dad was a manipulative bastard who couldn't just let us live our lives, she said. But then she sighed. I also think he might have been right. About us. About everything being broken and us being too cowardly to fix it. So we do it. Victoria met my eyes. We do it. But Emma, I need you to promise me something. If this gets too ugly, if we start really hurting each other, we stop. Money or no money, I don't want to destroy what little connection we have left. I promise, I said and meant it. Blackwood stood. Excellent. I'll leave you to get settled. The penthouse is fully stocked with everything you'll need. The recording equipment is set up in the study. It's voice activated, so just sit down and start talking when you're ready. I'll check in via video call each morning at 9. As he moved toward the elevator, he paused. One more thing. Your father left individual letters for each of you, to be read before you begin tomorrow's conversation. They're in your respective bedrooms. And then he was gone, leaving Victoria and me alone in our father's secret penthouse, about to embark on a week that would either rebuild or permanently destroy our relationship. Should we find our rooms? Victoria asked. Yeah, I said. And Emma? I'm scared. Me too, I admitted. But maybe that means we're doing the right thing. As I walked down the hall toward the bedroom Blackwood had indicated was mine, I saw the envelope on the pillow, cream-colored paper, sealed with Dad's signet ring just like the letter in court. I sat on the edge of the bed and broke the seal, my hands trembling. Inside was a single page in Dad's handwriting. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, you and your sister have chosen to try. That alone makes me prouder than you could possibly know. I have asked you to do something difficult, to be vulnerable, to be honest, to risk being hurt. I know this goes against every instinct I taught you. I spent your whole life telling you to be strong, to never show weakness, to protect yourself. I was wrong. The truth is I failed you both. I let my own fears and insecurities damage your relationship with each other. I let your mother's death turn me into someone cold and distant when you needed me most. And I prioritized building an empire over building a family. This program isn't really about the money, though I know that's what brought you here. It's about giving you the tools I never gave you. The ability to be honest with each other, to ask for what you need, to forgive and be forgiven. Your sister is not your enemy. She never has been. She's just a woman who's been hurting as much as you have, hiding it in different ways. Be brave, my darling girl. Be the Emma I always knew you could be, not the strong one, but the real one. Love always. Dad. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. From somewhere down the hall, I could hear Victoria crying too, and I knew she'd received a similar message. Tomorrow, we would begin the hardest conversation of our lives. But tonight, we were just 2 sisters, grieving the father we'd lost and the relationship we'd never quite had, preparing to either find each other or lose each other forever. Day one of our enforced cohabitation began with awkward silence over coffee. Victoria emerged from her bedroom looking like she hadn't slept, and I probably looked the same. We moved around the penthouse kitchen like dancers who'd never learned each other's steps, nearly colliding, over-apologizing, creating a buffer of false politeness that felt safer than real conversation. "Did you read your letter?" Victoria asked finally. "Yeah. You?" "Yeah." She stared into her mug. "He said he failed us." Mine said that too. We fell silent again. The weight of what we were about to do pressed down on both of us. In a few hours, we'd sit down in front of cameras and discuss why we resented each other. Not why we disagreed, or why we'd grown apart, but the raw, ugly resentments we'd been nurturing for years. "We don't have to do this," I said suddenly. "We could just say we tried, split the 47 million and go our separate ways." Victoria looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I couldn't quite name. "Is that what you want?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm terrified." "Me too." She set down her coffee. "But I keep thinking about what Dad wrote. About us not being enemies. And I realized I've spent so many years treating you like one that I don't even know how to talk to you like a sister anymore." "Then maybe we start there," I said. "Not with the resentments, but with just talking. Like humans. Tell me something about your life that I don't know." Victoria blinked, surprised. Then a small smile crossed her face. "Okay. I hate my job." "What?" "You're a senior VP at a venture capital firm. You love that stuff, the deals, the power plays, the money." "That's what I tell everyone," Victoria said. "That's what I tell myself. But the truth is I'm completely burned out. I haven't enjoyed work in 3 years. I keep doing it because it's what I'm good at, what people expect, what my husband expects. But every morning I wake up and dread going in." The vulnerability in her admission caught me off guard. "Why don't you quit?" "And do what?" She laughed bitterly. "I've built my entire identity around being successful. I'm Victoria Ashford Morrison, the woman who closed the Hendricks deal, who turned around 3 failing startups, who made partner at 32. Who am I if I'm not that?" "You're my sister," I said quietly. "You're someone who used to paint beautiful portraits. You're the person who taught me how to ride a bike because Dad was too impatient." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I haven't painted in 15 years. "Why not?" "Because Dad said it was a nice hobby, but I needed to focus on building a real career." She wiped her eyes. "And I listened to him because I was desperate for his approval. I gave up the one thing that made me happy because I thought success would make him proud of me." "He was proud of you," I said. "He bragged about you all the time. To other people maybe. But to me, it was always you could do better. Why didn't you close that deal? Your mother would have expected more." Victoria's voice broke. "Nothing I did was ever enough." I moved to sit beside her on the couch, close enough to touch but not quite touching. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it was like that. How could you? You were dealing with your own stuff. And I was too proud to admit I was struggling." She looked at me. "Your turn. Tell me something I don't know." I took a deep breath. "I dropped out of grad school." "What? When?" 2 years ago. I was supposed to be getting my PhD in art history. But after Mom died and then spending those months with Dad during his cancer, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit in libraries analyzing other people's creativity when real life was happening and people were dying, and I stopped, surprised by the emotion in my voice. "Does Dad know?" Victoria asked. "No. I never told him. I was too ashamed. He'd paid for my undergrad, and I'd gotten a full scholarship for the PhD program, and I just quit. I've been working as a museum administrator and pretending I'm still working on my dissertation." "Emma, that's nothing to be ashamed of," says the woman who's ashamed of wanting to quit a job she hates, I pointed out. We both laughed, and for a moment the tension broke. But then the clock on the wall chimed noon, and we both looked at it with dread. "It's time," Victoria said. "We should probably head to the study." The study was elegant and intimidating, with the camera equipment set up in a way that felt simultaneously professional and invasive. 2 chairs faced each other, close enough to make avoidance impossible. A small table between them held the list of topics, and a box of tissues. "The tissues are a nice touch," Victoria said dryly. "Really builds confidence." We sat down, and immediately the camera's red light flickered on. Voice activated, just like Blackwood had said. "Okay," I said, picking up the list with trembling hands. "Day 1. Why you resent each other. Should we take turns or?" "Let's just talk," Victoria said. "I'll start. I resent you because you got to be the favorite without even trying. You got Dad's love just by being yourself, sweet, artistic, gentle Emma who never challenged him, never made him uncomfortable. Meanwhile, I worked myself half to death trying to be what he wanted, and it was never enough. The words stung, but I forced myself not to get defensive. Okay. I resent you because you always made me feel like being myself wasn't enough. Like I should be more ambitious, more successful, more like you. And because after Mom died you pulled away completely and left me alone with Dad and all his grief. I pulled away because being around him hurt too much, Victoria shot back. Every time I looked at him I saw Mom, and I couldn't handle it. And you seemed to be handling everything so well, taking care of him, being strong. I wasn't strong. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. I was falling apart. I was terrified and sad and drowning in responsibility, but I couldn't show it because someone had to keep it together, and you weren't there. Because you never asked me to be there. Victoria's voice matched mine. You never called and said, I need help. You just silently martyred yourself, and then resented me for not reading your mind. You're right, I said, surprising both of us. You're absolutely right. I did do that. I do that with everyone. I pretend I'm fine when I'm not, and then I get hurt when people don't notice I'm struggling. Victoria deflated slightly. And I do the opposite. I pretend everything's a competition, that I'm winning at life, when really I'm miserable and don't know how to ask for help either. We're a mess, I said. We're Dad's daughters, Victoria corrected. He was exactly the same way. Kept everything locked up tight until he was literally dying and had no choice but to be vulnerable. Is that what this is? I asked, gesturing around the study. Dad trying to force us to be vulnerable before we waste our whole lives the way he did. Probably, Victoria said. And I hate that he was right. I hate that it took the threat of losing $200 million to get us to have a real conversation. Would we have had it otherwise? I asked honestly. No, Victoria admitted. I would have kept avoiding you, feeling vaguely guilty about the lawsuit, and we would have stayed strangers who send each other birthday cards and nothing else. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that admission settling over us. I resent you, I said quietly, because you got to be angry after Mom died. You got to throw yourself into work, to be cold and distant, to just check out. I had to be the good daughter, the caretaker, the one who held everyone together. And sometimes I wanted to scream and break things and run away, but I couldn't because that wasn't my role. Victoria's face crumpled. Emma, I'm so sorry. I never thought about it that way. I just assumed you wanted to be there for Dad, that it came naturally to you. Nothing about watching him die was natural, I said, tears streaming down my face now. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I did it alone because you weren't there. I should have been there, Victoria said, crying now too. I was a coward. I ran away from something hard, and I left you to deal with it by yourself, and that's unforgivable. It's not unforgivable, I said. But it hurt. God, Victoria, it hurt so much. She moved from her chair to kneel in front of me, taking my hands. I know it did, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We cried together then, really cried for the first time since we were children. All the years of hurt and distance and misunderstanding poured out in those tears. When we finally stopped, when the tissues were depleted and our eyes were swollen, Victoria looked at me. Can I tell you the real reason I sued you? Please. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was because when I saw that, giving everything to you, it felt like Dad was saying from beyond the grave that you were the daughter worth investing in. That you deserved his legacy and I didn't. And I couldn't accept that, so I convinced myself the will must be invalid, that he couldn't have been in his right mind. But he was, I said gently. But he was, Victoria agreed. And that will, the fake one, was designed to make me feel exactly that way. To push all my buttons about being second best, about never being enough. And I fell for it completely. We both fell for it, I reminded her. I wasn't exactly eager to share. The will said it was mine, and some part of me felt like it was finally my turn to be the favorite, my reward for all those months of caregiving. We're both kind of terrible, Victoria said with a watery laugh. We're both human, I corrected. We're both hurting and imperfect, and carrying around damage from our childhood. Victoria stood and returned to her chair. So what do we do now? I think we keep going, I said, glancing at the list. We have 6 more days of this. 6 more chances to be honest. Are you sure you want to? Victoria asked. Because I meant what I said before. If this gets too painful. It's already painful, I interrupted. But it's also the first real conversation we've had in a decade. And as much as it hurts, it also feels necessary. Like lancing a wound that's been infected for years. Victoria nodded slowly. Okay. But Emma, I need you to promise me something else. What? Promise me that no matter what comes out in these conversations, no matter what ugliness we uncover, we don't go back to being strangers after this week. Even if we can't be close, even if we can't fully forgive each other, we stay in contact. We try. I promise, I said. On one condition. Which is? You start painting again, I said. Not for Dad, not for anyone else. For you. Because you deserve to do something that makes you happy. Victoria's eyes widened. That's your condition? That's my condition. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Okay. Deal. And my condition for you is that you stop pretending to be fine when you're not. You tell people when you're struggling. Starting with me. Deal, I agreed. We shook hands, somewhat formally, somewhat ridiculously, but also with real intention. A pact between sisters who were trying, against all odds, to find their way back to each other. The camera's red light continued to glow, recording everything. Somewhere, James Blackwood would watch this footage and report back to our dead father's trust about whether we'd met the criteria for day one. But in that moment, I didn't care about the cameras or the money or the test. I cared about the fact that for the first time in years, I'd been truly honest with my sister, and she'd been honest with me, and we were both still here. It was a start, but as I would discover over the next 6 days, starting was the easy part, and the topics ahead would test us in ways we couldn't yet imagine. Day 7 arrived with an unexpected clarity. The penthouse that had felt like a prison on day 1 now felt almost sacred. A space where Victoria and I had systematically dismantled and rebuilt our relationship piece by painful piece. The conversations had been brutal. Day 4, discussing the biggest lies we'd told each other, had resulted in Victoria storming out and me sobbing in the bathroom for an hour. Day 5, saying what we'd never had the courage to say, had lasted until 3 in the morning and left us both emotionally raw. But here we were, sitting across from each other in the study one final time, about to tackle the last topic. Whether we could forgive each other. I've been thinking, Victoria said, about what forgiveness actually means. And I don't think it means forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. I think it means choosing to move forward anyway. She paused. The question is whether we can actually do that, or if we're too damaged. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The walls she'd maintained so carefully all week had crumbled. She'd cried in front of me, admitted to struggles with her marriage I'd never suspected, confessed to a pill dependency she'd developed to cope with work stress. And I'd done the same, revealing my own demons, depression, anxiety, the eating disorder I'd developed during Dad's illness. We'd seen each other at our absolute worst this week. And somehow we were still here. I forgive you, I said simply. For the lawsuit, for pulling away after Mom died, for all the little cruelties over the years. I forgive you. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Just like that. Just like that, I confirmed. Because I understand now why you did those things. And because holding on to resentment is exhausting, and I'm tired of being angry at my sister. I forgive you too, Victoria said, her voice cracking. For making me feel invisible, for being Dad's favorite, for... She stopped, laughed through her tears. Actually, you know what? Most of what I was angry about wasn't even your fault. It was Dad's favoritism and my own insecurity and a whole mess of family dysfunction that had nothing to do with you. But you forgive me anyway? I forgive you anyway, she agreed. For the things that were your fault and the things that weren't, because I want my sister back. I want to stop being strangers who share parents. The camera recorded it all, our tears, our tentative smiles, the way we both stood at the same moment and met in an embrace that felt like coming home after a very long journey. So what happens now? I asked when we finally pulled apart. Do we just go back to our lives and hope this sticks? Actually, Victoria said, I've been thinking about that. Can we sit for a minute? There's something I want to propose. We returned to our chairs, and Victoria pulled out her phone, swiping to a document she'd apparently been working on. I've spent this week doing more than just crying and confessing. I've also been researching. Researching what? The Ashford estate. All 237 million of it. She turned her phone toward me. Did you know Dad owns 17 properties across the state? Most of them in struggling neighborhoods, buildings he bought for cheap during the 2008 crash. Okay. I wasn't sure where she was going with this. Some of them are vacant. Some are barely breaking even. And some are being used in ways that would make Dad ashamed. One of them is a warehouse for a company that's been cited for labor violations. I leaned forward, intrigued. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we do something meaningful with this money. Not just sit on it or invest it or buy bigger houses. Victoria's eyes were bright with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen all week. What if we turned these properties into something that actually helps people? Affordable housing, community centers, programs for kids. The Ashford Foundation, I said slowly. Dad mentioned it in his letter. The charity that would get everything if we failed. Exactly. But what if we didn't fail? What if we passed his test, and then used the money to create something he would have been proud of? Victoria pulled up more documents. I've been sketching out ideas. There's this building downtown, completely vacant, massive space. It could be a community arts center. Classes for kids, gallery space for local artists, performance venues. My heart started beating faster. You're serious? Completely serious. Emma, we don't need $200 million split between us. We're already comfortable. But think about what we could do with that money if we actually tried. But the foundation Dad set up, that's already charity. We'd just be recreating what he already planned. No, Victoria said firmly. His foundation was a backup plan, something impersonal run by trustees. I'm talking about us, actively involved, using our own skills and interests. You have an art history background and museum experience. I have business acumen and connections. Together, we could actually build something lasting. I stared at her, seeing my sister clearly for perhaps the first time. This was who she'd been before Dad's expectations had twisted her into someone else, creative, passionate, wanting to make a difference. There's one problem, I said. We don't know if we've passed Dad's test. Blackwood hasn't told us the results yet. As if summoned by his name, Victoria's phone chimed. A video call from James Blackwood. We looked at each other, sudden nervousness flooding through both of us. Victoria answered, and Blackwood's face appeared on the screen. Good morning, ladies, he said. I apologize for the early call, but I wanted to catch you before you left the penthouse. I've completed my review of all 7 days of footage. And? Victoria asked, her voice tight. You passed, Blackwood said simply. More than passed, actually. Your father's criteria were quite specific about what constituted genuine progress versus performative vulnerability. You both exceeded those requirements significantly. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with something else. An awareness that passing the test was just the beginning. What happens now? I asked. Now we schedule a meeting to discuss the trust disbursement. The full $237 million will be split evenly between you, with some restrictions on how quickly you can access certain portions. There's also the matter of the properties and ongoing business interests. Actually, Victoria interjected, we'd like to discuss alternative arrangements. Blackwood's eyebrows rose. Alternative arrangements? Victoria explained our idea, the community center, the affordable housing, using the inheritance to create something meaningful rather than just splitting it down the middle. As she talked, I watched Blackwood's expression shift from surprise to something that looked almost like pride. Your father, he said when Victoria finished, included a provision in his will for exactly this scenario. If both daughters chose to create a joint charitable foundation rather than splitting the assets personally, the trust would support it with certain tax advantages and legal protections. He predicted we'd want to do this? I asked, incredulous. He hoped you would, Blackwood corrected. He built in multiple pathways depending on how you responded to his tests. This particular pathway, the one where you not only reconcile but choose to work together toward a common goal, this was his preferred outcome. Of course it was, Victoria said, but she was smiling. Manipulative to the very end. Perhaps, Blackwood agreed. But manipulative in service of something good. He wanted you to find each other again, and to find purpose beyond yourselves. It appears he succeeded. So what's next? I asked. Next, you'll meet with my office to establish the legal framework for your foundation. You'll need to decide on a mission statement, board structure, operational guidelines. It's a significant undertaking. Victoria reached over and took my hand. We're ready. One more thing, Blackwood said. Your father left a final video message, to be played only if you chose this path. Would you like to see it? We nodded, and Blackwood's face was replaced by our father's. He looked healthier than in the courtroom video. This must have been recorded earlier in his illness. My dearest daughters, Dad began, and my throat tightened at the sound of his voice. If you're watching this, it means you've done something I could never do. You've been vulnerable with each other. You've forgiven each other. And you've chosen to work together rather than divide what I've built. He paused, and I could see emotion in his eyes. I spent my life building an empire, but I failed to build a family. I let competition and comparison poison the relationship between my daughters. I prioritized success over connection, achievement over love. By the time I realized my mistake, your mother was gone and you two were strangers. This program, these tests, they were my last chance to fix what I broke. Not to control you from beyond the grave, but to give you the tools to heal. To force you to confront the things I was too cowardly to address while I was alive. Victoria squeezed my hand tighter. The money doesn't matter, Dad continued. It never did. What matters is that you have each other. That you learn to be sisters, not competitors. That you build something together that outlasts my legacy. He smiled, and it was so familiar it hurt. I love you both. I always have, even when I was terrible at showing it. And I'm prouder of you in this moment than I've ever been. Not because you're successful or accomplished, but because you chose connection over comfort, vulnerability over pride. The screen went dark. Victoria and I sat in silence, tears streaming down both our faces. He really did know us, Victoria finally said. He really did love us, I added. We sat there for a long moment, grieving the father we'd lost and celebrating the relationship we'd found. Outside the windows, the city was waking up, people starting their days, unaware of the small miracle that had just occurred in this penthouse. So, Victoria said, wiping her eyes and straightening her shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of our father it made me smile. Should we start planning this community center? Absolutely, I said. But first, I think we should grab breakfast. Actual breakfast, not coffee and avoidance. French toast, Victoria suggested. You remember? I was surprised. French toast had been our thing as kids, Saturday morning tradition before everything fell apart. Of course I remember, Victoria said. I remember everything, Emma. I just spent a long time pretending I didn't because it hurt less that way. We walked to the kitchen together, and as Victoria pulled out ingredients and I found the griddle, I felt something shift inside me. This was what Dad had wanted for us. Not the money, not the properties, but this. Two sisters making breakfast together, planning a future that included each other. 3 months later, we stood together at the grand opening of the Ashford Community Arts Center. The building that had sat vacant for years was now transformed. Bright galleries full of local artwork, studios where teenagers learned to paint and sculpt, a performance space where a children's choir was about to give their first concert. Victoria had quit her job at the venture capital firm. She ran the foundation now, bringing all her business expertise to bear on making sure every dollar was used effectively. And she'd started painting again. Her work hung in the center's main gallery, a series of portraits she'd titled Reconciliation. I'd officially withdrawn from my graduate program and taken on the role of arts director. It turned out that all those years of studying art history had prepared me perfectly to curate programs and mentor young artists. We weren't perfect. We still fought sometimes, still triggered each other's old wounds. But now we talked about it. We worked through it. We chose each other again and again. Dad would have loved this, Victoria said as we watched the community members flooding into the center for the opening celebration. Yeah, I agreed. He really would have. My phone buzzed. A text from James Blackwood. Congratulations on the opening. Your father would be immensely proud. P.S. There's one more surprise coming your way next week. Seems he planned for this outcome after all. I showed the text to Victoria, who laughed. Of course there's another surprise. With Dad, there's always another layer. Should we be worried? I asked. Probably, Victoria said. But whatever it is, we'll handle it together. Together. That word meant something now. Not just two people related by blood, but two sisters who'd chosen each other, who'd fought through years of damage to build something real. The inheritance had been a test, but the real legacy was this. A second chance, a new beginning, and the knowledge that family isn't just about who you're related to, but about who shows up for the hard conversations and stays through the difficult work of forgiveness. As the sun set over our community center, casting golden light across the faces of the families who would benefit from our father's final gift, I realized that we'd received something far more valuable than $237 million. We'd received each other, and that, as it turned out, was the inheritance that truly mattered.